What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the United Devils YouTube channel. My name is Aryan, and I am back again, this time with a predicted 11 and a small preview in the build up to United's fixture against Arsenal. Another one of those very important, almost six-pointer like league games. It started off with Newcastle. That was huge to build to build the confidence back up, to pick the team up off the ground after that Spurs game. That was a huge one. Then the next game after that was, of course, Chelsea. 0-0 draw. Performance was better. United were the better team. It felt like a loss, which is good in hindsight because you don't want to go out of those games thinking that you were able to scrape away with a point. You go away from that game as a United fan feeling a bit of a distaste in your mouth because the win was so close, if not for a good performance from their goalkeeper. And now United go into this one, 2 games obviously unbeaten in the league, unbeaten in the last 4 after the international break, 3 wins, 1 draw, obviously against Chelsea. Some very good victories against Leipzig, against PSG, convincing against Newcastle. So when United have been winning, they've been very convincing. The performances have been better. The response has been tremendous since that international break, which came at a perfect time after that Spurs defeat. It allowed the group to kind of regather their focus. Solskjaer was able to pick them up off the ground. The players were, I think, able to let that simmer, let that loss, that humiliating and humbling defeat simmer, and they came back, and now it feels like everybody's upped it a little bit. The levels have gone up, the fitness levels, obviously the sharpness has increased because of the no preseason. Now it feels like United are finally starting to get in the groove. It feels like now we're finally starting to see that United side that are close to their best, and we know that at their best they can be frightening. And obviously how this season is shaping up at the moment, quite a lot of teams have gotten off to a slow start. Not only United, who are currently 15th in the table on 7 points with a game in hand on most, including Everton and Liverpool, who are occupying the top 2 spots. Liverpool are right now on 16 points with their win today at the time of recording this against West Ham, and Everton are on 13, but United obviously have a game in hand on both. And as of right now, United are still to play, so they have 2 games on Liverpool, so that deficit is not going to be as big should United win in their game against Arsenal, which is huge. And it's a great time to play this game as well because Arsenal are coming into it on the back of 2 league defeats back to back. They haven't been able to kind of nail down an effective system of play. They're still struggling a little bit, albeit they are ahead of United in the league. But it feels like United have turned that corner. First of all, that Newcastle game wasn't enough. Then PSG, you needed more. Now 4 games in a row of United playing some very good football in a similar style, rotating systems, rotating players. Everybody is fresh, hungry. You feel like that's enough to kind of determine that United have turned that corner and they're on their way up. Whereas Arsenal seem to be kind of hanging in the balance. A win here would see United go ahead of them in the league, as Arsenal are just in and around that mid-table spot. And it feels like it's the perfect time to play them. Although it feels like in the past few years, United have been playing Arsenal at this time where most fans, by consensus, felt that it was the perfect time to play them when it comes to run of form. And Arsenal always are able to turn it up a notch. So I think the most important thing before I go into my 11 going into this game is just the mentality aspect. And I think now, more than maybe ever under Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, or maybe under all of the previous managers, it feels like there is no room for complacency. But it also feels like if there is a player that does get complacent, that doesn't put in a shift, that doesn't put in a good performance, he can get dropped. The depth, we saw United rotate quite heavily for Leipzig midweek, and a very strong team came out, and a very strong bench options then emerged for Ole Gunnar Solskjaer to put on mid-game. And then we saw Bruno and Marcus Rashford come on, and Rashford scored a hat-trick in like 15 minutes. And the team wasn't any worse for it. Last season, if you take out Marcus Rashford and Bruno Fernandes out of that lineup, that team will struggle. That team is missing a player who scored 22 goals in all competitions, and also missing a player who notched up 20 plus goal contributions in his first like 20 games for the club. So now though, with the additions of Cavani, Donny van de Beek, Alex Telles, who obviously is still recovering from the coronavirus, and a couple of youngsters, it's looking better. It's looking like the team is deeper. Solskjaer has more options that he can rely on. He is not hesitating to go to his bench. He's not doing it too late. He's doing it in enough time to let those players that are coming on to affect the game. And he's also able to tinker. He's able to tweak systems, tweak tactics, and he's kind of just game by game going away from that PE teacher stigma that he has around his name, which is very unjust for anybody. It's very unjust, and it's obvious for anybody who watches United games objectively without agenda covered sunglasses. So, without further ado, with all that being said, let's get into my predicted 11. I think the players that didn't start against Leipzig will be back in, namely Marcus Rashford and Bruno Fernandes. But personally, this is my prediction, not what I think Solskjaer would do. But I do think that it would be in United's best interest to play that diamond again, the same one that played against Leipzig, just obviously different in personnel ever so slightly. So in goal, I would have David De Gea. I don't think there's a way in there for Dean Henderson at the moment, with De Gea playing very well. And I do believe, though, that those two games coming up against Istanbul, Başakşehir in the Champions League back-to-back will be the two that Dean Henderson will get starting minutes in, and much needed ones too for his own England stake and everything else. But I do think for now David De Gea remains. I think the back four will remain the same. I'm seeing a lot of people on social media hoping for Axel Tuanzebe to step in. I think that wouldn't be the worst idea, but also that back line of Wan-Bissaka, Lindelof, Maguire and Shaw has looked better. Considering that three of those players were the ones that were mostly at fault for United conceding 6 to Spurs, they've bounced back quite a lot. Victor Lindelof being dropped for that game, I think, also managed to regather himself, and now it looks a completely different player and a very solid kind of spine to that back line with Harry Maguire. So I do think that they will stay intact, and Tuanzebe, similar to Dean Henderson, will get his minutes in the Champions League. Obviously, it's also important for Tuanzebe to be eased back into action, because you don't want the things that keep happening to Eric Bailly to happen to Axel, who seems like he can become very quickly a very, very valuable asset to this football club. So I wouldn't expect many changes or any changes in that back five, especially with Alex Telles still unavailable, and now Aaron Wan-Bissaka, Maguire and Lindelof hitting their usual heights. So I think that back line is becoming a well-oiled machine. They've only conceded twice since the international break, since that 6-1 defeat to Spurs, and both of those were own goals after individual mistakes, if you want to say. So, and none of the teams that United have played against really looked that threatening. So I think you have to trust that back line and just let them go out there again and see if they can put the shackles on the Arsenal front line, who hasn't been that potent this season. Aubameyang hasn't been firing, Lacazette hasn't been firing. I think it's a back line that United very well can contain. It's just, like I said earlier, the mental aspect of it. You have to stay locked in, no complacency, no entitlement, no feeling that the game is already won before you step out on the pitch. You have to go out there and, like Solskjaer always preaches, outwork, outrun, and then outplay in order to win the game. And then going into the diamond, I would stick with the diamond, because I do think that with the Arsenal's wing-back formation, that is very much a five at the back when they are defending very compact and they try to counter-attack. I do think that United have a perfect opportunity here to play more central players and try to cut through them through the middle and overrun and overcrowd that midfield area that's usually occupied by only two players at Arsenal. In the last game it was Dani Ceballos and Thomas Partey, which both two very good players, but 2 on 4 creates a lot of mismatches and a lot of opportunities for United's hard-working defensive midfielders to win that ball back, to press, and then for the 2 other ones, who are usually the more creative ones, to go in there and do some damage. So I would like to see Solskjaer go with that diamond again. I would bring Scott McTominay back in for Matic. I would keep Fred in there, who has been absolutely fantastic in the last few games, especially when it comes to work rate and defensive work. And I would keep Paul Pogba in there, who looked very good in that game against Leipzig, when he was given just a little bit more license to stay ahead and to kind of play his own game instead of having too many defensive commitments. And for as bad as maybe some fans feel about that, maybe some fans don't like it, he is that good. He gives you that much quality when he can play his game that you do try to accommodate him. And I think having those 2 players who are very focused on defensive work that was Matic and Fred against Leipzig, and for me it would be McTominay and Fred here. Gives Pogba the opportunity to link up with whoever plays in the 10, which for me would be Bruno, and also gives Pogba the ability to roam. He's usually finds himself on the left. That's the pockets of space that he likes to occupy, and he feels the most dangerous in, I feel, and he's the most effective in for United too. Obviously, he picked up that ball on the left against Leipzig after Fred won it back in the middle, took a couple of strides forward and played in Mason Greenwood with a fantastic ball to match Mason Greenwood's excellent and aware run through the middle, and that gave United the first goal. So I do think that United have something there. I think what McTominay gives you instead of Matic is just a bit more energy. He's a bit more dynamic in the tackle and a little bit more aggressive as well. So against an Arsenal side that are probably going to be a little more technical, perhaps, than the Leipzig side, I think McTominay to go in there with his physicality and the willingness to tackle and not backing out, and just that mobility, just being able to cover more ground than Matic, could be a good option here for him and Fred to cover for Pogba. And like I said, Bruno, who I also have in there. And Bruno, on paper, comes out as that number 10 central attacking midfielder, but in reality, he has the license to roam too. He takes upon himself defensive commitments. He's always seen in his own half in latter parts of the game and in key moments of the game trying to win the ball back, and also doing that quite a lot. And we saw from what area of the pitch he set up Marcus Rashford's first goal, a second on the night for United against Leipzig, with a very aware, eyes around your head kind of play and the pass through. So Bruno is a guy that you put out there on paper as a central attacking midfielder, but he really does play everywhere, more or less. So that, I think, would be the perfect kind of midfield to keep Pogba in for a very big and important game for United. You want United to go out there mostly all guns blazing, because you don't want to give them too much respect, because I feel like United gave Chelsea a bit too much respect last week, and that kind of ended up backfiring because Solskjaer didn't tweak fast enough, they didn't turn up the tempo fast enough, and United just ran out of time as they were looking like they were approaching a goal. And maybe with fans in there in the Stretford end, like Solskjaer does like to say, the ball would have been pulled in eventually to the goal, but that didn't happen. I think against Arsenal, the first 10, 15, 20 minutes are normal for a feel-out period, but I think United have to go out there with that intent that they have against Leipzig, where you press them. Arsenal have their own defensive frailties. Their backline is still not as solid as they would like it to be. They're not that comfortable on the ball. It could have been seen against City, and in most of the big games that Arsenal play, they like to stay compact at the back and don't really try to break any press. If they're pressed, they will just go long and try to regroup, and I think United could very well take advantage of that with just how much energy and ability and just vision and the X factors that they have with their central players, and then moving into the front line. United could really take advantage of going in there with that high energy, a lot of intent, wanting to go and score goals and press high, with a rotated lineup with some fresh legs coming back into the team. I think that would be the perfect way to approach this Arsenal side. And that leaves me obviously with a split two, which I have been liking, whether it was Martial and Rashford or Martial and Greenwood against Leipzig. They have looked good. They have looked like they are working together. They're occupying their own zones. Greenwood obviously against Leipzig seemed to press more on the right. Martial was occupying the left where he feels the most comfortable. Obviously he is still suspended that's the last game of his domestic suspension against Arsenal. So for me, I would go with Marcus Rashford. Obviously on the back of a hat-trick, he comes back in. And then I would stick with Mason Greenwood, who came off after about 60 minutes. After not being in action for a little bit, he got that very important run out against Leipzig. He scored a goal that does wonders for his confidence, and he looked sharp. He looked very poised in that central role. He was giving Upamecano, one of the world's highest regarded centre-backs, a lot of problems, and he obviously outwitted him for that first goal with a very clever run that he made from that number 9 role that he was occupying at the time. And I do think that himself and Marcus Rashford can cause Arsenal's defence a lot of problems. And Greenwood obviously against Leipzig got a run out against a side that plays 3 central defenders, and Arsenal will do the same thing. And I think that was a very good test for him to go into this Premier League game. A game where United really, really need that win. Like I said, it's almost like a 6-pointer because not only does it add just another couple of bricks to the foundation that has already been laid out in terms of the momentum, but it also just propels United in the league. It puts them in a much better stead for the next week's game against Everton, and all of a sudden you're closer to that top four, and you're seeing the top of the league in a league season that looks very wide open with teams very inconsistent. I think whoever can pick up that consistency going into the Christmas period and into the new year can put themselves very much among that title race, which still has not been determined who will be in it as of yet. So I do think, just to go over it again, David De Gea in goal, Wan-Bissaka, Maguire, Lindelof, Shaw in the back, Fred, McTominay, Pogba, Bruno as a diamond of central players, with I think McTominay maybe the one that's sitting the deepest, and then Marcus Rashford and Mason Greenwood as my split 2 pairing to top off this 4-4-2 diamond, if you want to call it that formation, for this massive game against the Gunners.